Let's give a warm library welcome for Amanda.
Thank you. So thank you for that introduction. I am a registered dietitian. I'm also, for a couple of years now, actually, it's not recent anymore, I'm a certified diabetes care and education specialist. I'm the coordinator for both the weight management, nutrition, and diabetes departments at Sherman. So I obviously will kind of go through. I do like to have this conversational a bit. There's not a huge group here, so if you have questions, please just go ahead and raise your hand, and we can take questions throughout the presentation.
Okay.
Food as medicine. So as a dietitian, I love the idea of if we could just do away with all of the pharmaceuticals and all of that. Wonderful, right? But the reality is that we need both, but a large part of having a healthy lifestyle starts with what we're eating and what we're putting into our bodies, right? So we'll focus on many different facets of this today, of diet rich in fruits and vegetables. Overall, improves multiple different chronic diseases. It can prevent against multiple different chronic diseases. Kind of the overarching, I know many people hear like 5 a day. That's been the recommendation for many, many years. It still is the recommendation, 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. And then obviously we'll get it more into diet and lifestyle modification. All right, so I pulled these two styles of eating. There are so many different styles of eating that have a lot of research behind them. Today we're going to go through kind of a more so well-rounded style of eating. So the food groups that we'll go through, this kind of is what we model as a plate model, where really half of your plate should be what we call non-starchy vegetables, a quarter carbohydrates, and a quarter protein. And then over on the right side, this looks similar to back in like 80s, 90s. This is what similar to what was taught in schools. This is actually a Mediterranean pyramid. So we'll break that down. It is a little bit different than what we remember as the food pyramid. All right, so as we break some of these things down, vegetables, right? We've got lots of different types of vegetables, different colors of vegetables. Ultimately, when we think about vegetables and using them for health and promoting health, we do want to differentiate even further. So I have listed up here starchy versus non-starchy vegetables. Now, our starchy vegetables, those are going to be things, I think that we generally think of. Potatoes is a big one, sweet potatoes, corn, green peas. If you do any like lentils or black beans, pinto beans, things like that, those are all going to fall into what we call that starchy vegetable category. Our non-starchy vegetables are really mostly what we think of. Green beans, broccoli, cauliflower, bell pepper, all of those types of vegetables really are going to fall into that non-starchy category. So if we flip back here, we have those non-starchy vegetables on the left-hand side, and then those starchy vegetables, those are actually going to fall into that carbohydrate category. How much do we need? Women, generally, we need at least 2.5 cups a day. Men, at least 3 cups a day. Now, I like to start with this and I say this is kind of a minimum that we really prefer to get. I like to use, there's something that we use in the hospital and we say more is better. When we come to these types of vegetables, more is generally better, right? If they have more fiber, they're going to make us feel more full and satisfied. All right, so we went through some of these vegetables. We'll go on to grains. So how many of you have heard of or are familiar with whole grains? All right, excellent. So I think a lot of people know about whole grains, but what is it, right? Like, it's a very elusive term. It's actually very straightforward. When we are talking about whole grains, they're quite literally using all parts of the grain. Let's see, what's the pointer? Oh, that's not it. There it is. Okay, so when we think about like the different parts of the grain, essentially, when we have, let's just go basic. Let's say white refined flour, something that we're using for baking, an all-purpose flour. Essentially what's happening is they are removing the bran, that dark outer covering, they're removing the germ on the inside, and we are left with just the endosperm. And that's ultimately anything really that we think of as white flour, white rice, white pasta, anything like that. Ultimately, we're getting rid of that bran, which really has most of that fiber present, and then we're getting rid of the germ, which again is where a lot of our vitamins and micronutrients come in. And what's left is really just that refined starchy carbohydrate inner part. Now, if you read nutrition labels, on a lot of products, they say enriched wheat flour. What happens with that is that they've taken away all of this stuff still, and they've synthetically added some vitamins and minerals back in with that starchy part that they're still using. So those are things generally that are happening during food production. Ultimately, what do you care about? What do you really want to remember when you go to the grocery store? When we look at that ingredient list, we want that very first ingredient to have the word whole. Whether it says whole grain, whole wheat, whole whatever kinds of options, whole is the number one key word that we really want to see. Protein. So we have quite a variety of different proteins. I have many of them listed here. This is by no means an exhaustive list of all of our different sources of protein. Some of our proteins differ simply in the type of protein, right? So for example, when we get our animal-based meat proteins, we're getting meat protein, but there's sometimes a trade-off that comes with it, right? We get saturated fats that come with that meat protein. We obviously want to go with our leaner proteins. Fish, of course, is our gold standard when it comes to animal proteins. Twice a week is our general recommendation. Beef, pork, chicken, turkey, always trying to go with our leaner options. I was just talking to a patient today and I said, what's the difference if we have a 90% lean ground turkey in front of us and we have a 90% lean ground beef sitting in front of us? They're both 90% lean. So why is it that turkey gets such a good rap? Any guesses? What's that? That tryptophan, that's what you're going with that.
Is it the saturated fat?
It's the saturated fat. So even that 10% remaining fat, beef naturally gives us more saturated fat per ounce. And so that 10 remaining fat, that's exactly correct. It's more saturated fat. We have plenty of alternative protein sources. Our plant proteins, things like tofu, seeds, nuts, butters, edamame, there's tempeh. I mean, we got so many other different non-meat plant-based sources that we can get protein from as well. Fruits. So when we think about our fruits, why do we care about fruit, right? I think a lot of people are like, you know, fruit has a lot of sugar in it. Should we be eating it? Shouldn't we be eating it? Ultimately, when it comes to fruit, we really want to be thinking about the nutrients that we're getting from it, right? So fruit, while it does have naturally occurring sugar, first it's sugar that we like to include, right? It's healthy sugar. But we're, along with that natural sugar, we're also getting tons of vitamins and nutrients, right? Part of the reason that we say, if you've ever heard like eat the rainbow, the reason that we say that is because we get different types of nutrients from different colored vegetables and fruits. So for example, many of you know that from tomatoes we get lycopene. Has anyone ever heard that before? So lycopene is that type of nutrient that we get from red vegetables. It's very common that we talk about it with tomatoes, but we get it from every single type of red fruit or vegetable because that's the color that's really giving that nutrient. If we look at carrots, we get carotene, right? So all of these different colors are giving us different sources of nutrients, and that's why we like to eat variety. What counts? So technically fresh, frozen, dried, canned. If we do canned, we always want to go packed in its natural juice. Anything that has the word syrup means we're adding sugar to it. Fresh or frozen generally would be kind of our preferred. They're usually not adding anything to those. And then of course juice, the big question with juice. Juice ultimately, we like to limit, while it is still giving us some vitamins and nutrients, there's no fiber in fruit. We are stripping out all of that fiber, which is a main reason that we really like to include fruit. And then how much do you need a day? Generally, we recommend 1.5 cups for women and 2 cups for men. Okay, dairy products. So dairy products really can range significantly, right? We've got anything from skim milk, 1%, 2% whole milk, then we've got half and half and heavy cream and so on, right? Ultimately, when we think about dairy products, and I know that oftentimes you hear, don't just go with the low-fat version because they might be adding things to it to make it taste better or to, offset the flavor of it. And that can be true for a lot of different products, but specifically when we talk about dairy products, they're quite literally skimming off the milk fat. And so dairy products, we always want to go with our low-fat or non-fat versions to minimize those saturated fat calories. Kefir. Kefir, if anyone doesn't know what that is, it's kind of a marriage between milk and yogurt. It's almost like a drinkable yogurt, very high in probiotics. And then alternative dairy products, right? Things like soy milk, almond milk, coconut. The trade-off with these, for a lot of people who have intolerances to dairy products, these can be a fantastic substitution. I will say that specifically our nut milks, almond, coconut, we do not get any protein from them. The cow's milk, we do still get protein. So when we think about maintaining muscle mass and things like that, the cow's milk still would be the better alternative, or soy milk. All right, so that kind of brings us back. So we've kind of hit on all of our categories, our non-starchy vegetables, our carbohydrate foods. Those are going to include all of those starchy vegetables, the grains, the fruits, and the dairy products actually all fall into that carbohydrate category. And then the protein foods, obviously we went through that slide as well. All right, so let's talk about, now we kind of know those basic food groups, as we get into healthy cooking, right? So when we think about lots of different ways to add flavor to cooking, the first thing that a lot of people say, and I think when they first come to me to work with me as a dietitian, they say, well, fat adds flavor, right? And that is true, and certainly I won't protest that. Fat is one way to flavor food. There's a lot of other healthy ways to flavor food too. So some of my own personal favorite ways to flavor food is either fresh herbs during the summer when I can grow them, and dried herbs and spices when I don't have those available. So fresh herbs, if you have the luxury of growing, a small garden or putting pots outside your front door. I live in a townhome, so I don't have the luxury of a massive garden, but pots work just the same. I have just a couple ideas on here of like, how could we use these fresh herbs in cooking, right? So if you wanted to make your own tomato sauce, you could, cheat and go with canned tomatoes and go with a low sodium tomato. You could smash up your own fresh tomatoes if you like that, but we could add fresh basil to that, fresh oregano, things like that to add flavor. We could top roasted potatoes with fresh rosemary. That adds really fantastic flavor. Add mint to a seltzer water or water to add flavor. Add thyme to a beef stew, adds a lot of flavor. So these are things that we can do even if we go with leaner protein choices or things that maybe don't have as much salt or fat in them. We can add flavors with these herbs. If we don't have the fresh and we have just those dried herbs, a lot of different ways that we can use those herbs. One of my favorite kind of cheat methods is go with a salt-free seasoning blend. It's less work for you. You can just sprinkle it on. There's usually a handful of these different dried herbs and seasonings present. But if you don't want to do that, if you like to be an adventurous in the kitchen, great. Stock your pantry with a variety of these different dried herbs and seasonings, and we can use those for flavoring. Whether we're cooking any type of meat, potato, starch, grain, vegetable, we can use herbs and seasonings like this to add flavor. Citrus fruits add a fantastic flavor. The citrus can also work as a tenderizer in a lot of meats. Some ways that we could use citrus to add flavor, even just squeezing a little bit of lemon. My probably cheat that I go to when I'm cooking broccoli even is I'll just squeeze a little, wedge of lemon when it's done. Doesn't take a lot of lemon. Lemon goes a long way, but that's a nice way to just add a little bit extra flavor. Some lemon zest, if you would like to do something like that. This says lemon with grilled fish, but really lemon, lime, oranges, fish works wonderfully with any type of citrus.
I have a question.
Yes.
What about oils? Like I have a citrus oil.
Yeah. So ultimately, oil is going to be our healthier fat. Anything that's liquid at room temperature, like an oil, is going to be a healthier version of fat, of any type of fat source. One thing that I would say is it's hard to know. So this is something that you made or purchased? Did you make this or you purchased this? Purchased this. So we don't know how much of it is oil, how much of it is citrus. I think this is a great go-to if you don't have a lot of time. But I would just say maybe check out and see like how many calories are in it, because citrus, if we even had a whole quarter cup of lemon juice, let's say, that's still probably only gonna run us maybe 15, 20 calories. And depending on if you look at the label on that bottle, if it says closer to 100 for a tablespoon, that might tell us that there's more oil than citrus.
Find that you really only have to put like 1 drop.
Oh, it's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, then that sounds great. If it's not something you're like really cooking, like using large amounts of. That sounds great then. Yeah. Great. Any other questions before I keep going?
Actually, yeah. So I think for people like me that I can't eat seafood.
Okay.
So that's another protein that I know I'm missing out on omega-3s, right? Because I know I can't eat that stuff. So like, how do I make up for that?
What other sources can give you that kind of nutrient? A lot of our nuts and seeds give us those kinds of nutrients. So specifically flaxseed, chia seed, also things like walnuts and pecans are very high in omega-3s and omega-6 as well. So those would be kind of my top ones that I would say.
So I can still get it. So, okay.
Absolutely, you can. Yeah, great. Okay, all right. And then if we look over under stocks and broths, stocks and broths also can be a really great way to add flavor. A lot of times when recipes call for you to add water, even if you just replace that same quantity with broth, can add a lot of flavor. One thing that you could even do if you really wanted to get crazy, a lot of those store-bought broths have a lot of sodium in them. Even when they say reduced sodium or 50% less, things like this. So 50% less than what? Reduced from what? There is actually no legal legislation in the United States limiting the use of those kinds of terms. So what you want to look for instead would be words that say low sodium. Low, legally in the United States, means less than 140 milligrams of sodium per serving. So that's a word that we really want to look for. No salt added could be another word that we look for. I remember years ago I picked up a 50% reduced sodium chicken broth. It had 800 milligrams in it for a 1 cup serving. So you can be deceived. I as a dietitian, I can't tell you how many times I look at something once it's in my house and I say, oh man, I should have read this label when I was in the grocery store. Because it's so important that we're looking to see what the food, what kinds of nutrients we're getting. But using that broth, if you do want to save your veggie scraps, things like carrots, celery, I'll throw in ends of zucchini, you can make your own vegetable broth. It doesn't really take long to make, and then you can put it into containers and freeze it, pull it out if you want to make soup, or use it for things like this, just to flavor other things. All right, marinades. So when we think about marinades, this is another really fantastic way to add flavor to food without adding a lot of fat. It really can help tenderize, especially meat proteins. You know, if you were to throw in, we'll talk about vinegars next, but we just talked about the citruses. If we were to take some, you know, a little bit of oil, citrus, vinegar, marinate it together with some other types of dried herbs or seasonings, things like this, and throw the chicken in for a couple hours, that chicken is going to be really, really flavorful, but also very tender. And so marinades are a fantastic way to add flavor. In general, you'll always hear me say it's better if you make it at home, but we live in a society where maybe you just don't have the time, or maybe you just don't want to have the time. Maybe you have a busy social life. The store-bought marinades in a pinch absolutely are still gonna be a better option for you. And then our vinegars, we've got so many different types of vinegar. We've got red wine vinegar, white wine vinegar, balsamic, apple cider, right? We've got all these different types of vinegars. Including these vinegars in your cooking, I know there's kind of some trendy things or popular things with, you know, some types of vinegars and using them for alternative health benefits, which absolutely can be beneficial, but the more that we use it in cooking, it's going to be better for us. I just gave a number of different ways that we can use vinegar in cooking, just to give you an idea of like, why does vinegar and citrus make such, why is it so helpful? If we have a tablespoon of vinegar in front of us, depending on what variety, it's 5 to 10 calories for a tablespoon. So it can add a lot of flavor, and we oftentimes don't even need a whole tablespoon because vinegar is very strong. All right, so we'll move away from those flavor boosters for a moment, and we'll talk about some other strategies for healthy eating. So healthy eating on the run. A lot of times we're just busy, we're maybe running from, appointment to appointment or work to something later in the day, whatever it might be, we as a society have very busy lives. So healthy eating on the run. The number one thing that I would kind of promote or emphasize is really still trying to avoid that processed food. How do we do that? Make a plan. So I kind of have, I'm gonna skip a few, plan your portion, plan your meals. If we know ahead of time, if you're thinking, gosh, it's gonna be a busy Thursday for me, I don't know how I'm gonna make dinner that night. If we already have a plan in place, if we even already have that dinner cooked, we're gonna be more successful at not stopping and going through the drive-through and having that healthy option available. I'll go back a little bit. If maybe we aren't as perfect at that planning as maybe we want to be or have desires to be, we still can have healthy, ready, prepared food. So I'm a huge fan of go and run into Jewel or Aldi on my way home and just grab one of those little salad kits and some cooked chicken to go with it. Now I've got a really fast meal that I didn't have to go through the drive-through for. Jewel even has prepared meals at the front of the grocery store that has a vegetable, a starch, and a protein in it. So it really helps us to follow that plate model. Well, again, it's maybe not our healthiest option. It's still usually going to be a healthier option than fast food. Keywords when you are trying to pick out food, on the run when you're just looking for something fast and easy. I have these kind of keywords highlighted for you. So baked, braised, boiled, grilled, poached, roasted, steamed. These really are going to be our healthiest cooking methods. So anytime you see these words, your brain automatically can kind of tune in and say, okay, I know that this is going to be a healthier option, right? If I'm standing in front of that case at Jewel and I see a roasted chicken or I see a fried chicken, that roasted chicken is going to be significantly lower in fat. Not only because we're not adding fat to cook it like we are with the fried, but when we roast or grill, do I have grilling up here? I do. Roasting or grilling actually is going to naturally allow some of that fat to drip away as well. All right, snacking smart. Snacking smart. snack when you're hungry. I think so often we can get into kind of a rhythm of saying, you know what, this is my time for a snack. I know I'm a culprit of that when I get home from work. I grew up as a kid, I always had a snack when I got home from school, whether I was hungry or not. Now I come home and I'm looking for a snack right after work. That's habit, right? A lot of times that's not necessarily hunger, that's habit, right? Other reasons that we might be snacking, maybe it could be emotional, maybe we're bored, maybe we're frustrated, angry, sad, maybe your husband or child or spouse said something to you that you're just angry with, and a lot of times we're turning to food. So sometimes just asking yourself, why am I eating? Or rating that hunger on a scale of 1 to 10. If we're not at least a 7 or higher on that hunger scale, maybe we need to find something else to do. What to do instead of snacking? So a lot of times if we're below that 7, play a game, chew a piece of gum, go drink a glass of water, find a puzzle to do, lots of different things that we can do. Really, we want to stimulate your brain and distract your brain into something else. Plan your snack. So if you know that eventually you're going to want a snack, right? That's okay. But we want to have a plan for what those healthy snacks are going to be. So wash and cut your fruit ahead of time. Same thing with your vegetables. Keep low-fat cheese, especially I'm a big fan of like the string cheeses because those are portioned out. We could just grab one individual versus cutting some unknown quantity off of a block. Nuts and seeds are a fantastic option, very heart healthy. They're gonna give us those omega-3s. However, we still wanna be cautious with the quantity that we're having. Even though they have so many heart health benefits, too much of anything can be a good thing. Nuts is a good example because if you look at if you kind of cup your hand, if you take a handful of nuts, let's say, that's roughly a quarter cup. Roughly a quarter cup runs us about 200 calories for nuts. So something just to be aware of, that we don't want to just have that as an endless supply grazing throughout the day. Air pop popcorn, a serving size of popcorn is generally about 3 cups once it's popped. So that's I think a better for more of a snack type food. And then to serve with any of those fresh cut vegetables or fruits, low-fat yogurt, hummus, peanut butter. In general, we like to choose something that has fiber. So if I use, let's see. So if we look up here, we're gonna get fiber from our fruits and our vegetables, and we wanna pair that with a protein source. So the low-fat cheese, the nuts, yogurt, hummus, peanut butter, those are gonna be our protein sources, and we wanna pair our proteins with that fiber. That's gonna keep you much more full and satisfied for a longer period of time. All right, dining out. So when we think about dining out, I'm just gonna grab a quick drink of water here. Okay, when we think about dining out can be, I think, depending on your health goals, intimidating, because dining out comes with a lot of times a lot of different calories, sometimes unknown calories if we're at a restaurant that doesn't list that type of nutrition information. One thing that I do recommend always is trying to look up the restaurant or cafeteria menu ahead of time. Oftentimes when we are not in the moment and your stomach is growling and you're hungry, you're ready to eat, if we can already have made a healthy decision prior to arriving at the restaurant, that a lot of times can help us just to make a better decision. Substitute the chips, potatoes, fries side. I'm not saying that this is an easy thing to do, but the calorie difference oftentimes can be maybe several hundred if we're going with something like chips or fries, trading it out for a side salad, broccoli, fruit, things like that. Breads. I call this the bread phenomenon. If you go to a restaurant and they put bread on the table, are you gonna sit on your hands and just look at the bread, or are you going to wanna eat it, right? Same thing with chips and salsa. That is oftentimes what we call a calorie trap, right? That's gonna throw you into having more calories than you want. making those choices ahead of time, asking, if you're there with other people, asking to just push the bread to that side of the table, maybe out of reach. Or if you really think, we don't want to eat it, maybe even asking the server to just take it off your table. And then again, I have these key words here: baked, braised, broiled, grilled, poached, roasted, steamed. Again, same thing when we're in a restaurant. These are gonna be our healthier cooking methods. Okay, so family and friends gathering tips. So I was trying to think of what might be coming up. We've kind of gone through the hardest 2 weeks of the year very recently. Maybe you've got a Super Bowl party coming up, I don't know. But in general, a lot of times when we have these types of gatherings, these are also super difficult to navigate, right? So when we think about following the plate model with our regular everyday eating, we really still want to do that when we're in these types of situations. Now, again, not always easy. I think personally, there's not always a vegetable available at these types of gatherings. So what can you do to change that or fix that? Maybe you offer to bring a vegetable tray or something that's still gonna give you something that's gonna be a healthier option. And then putting that food on your plate first. I think I have it somewhere on here. I don't have it on here. I like to recommend that you walk around that buffet once first without a plate, decide what our healthier options are gonna be. What do you really wanna prioritize? Maybe there's something that is really not that healthy, but you love and you really wanna have that on your plate. Great, put it on your plate. We're gonna prioritize that as one of those more calorie dense foods, and then we can trade it out for other types of more nutrient dense foods. Deciding in advance, change is okay. So I think another thing that oftentimes we can be very maybe strict with ourselves or not strict with ourselves and say, I'm on this healthy eating journey, but I'm gonna give myself a pass today. Well, one thing that I would say to ask yourself, if we're in that situation, how worth it is this party to you? Is this something that's that important that we want to kind of go off a healthy eating plan for? Or maybe it is. But I would also say it's okay to just say, this time around I'm just not gonna go off my plan. I'm super motivated right now. I wanna stick to my goals. Change is okay. After your meal, take a walk with your family or friends. Getting that motion, that activity, not only is going to help with digestion, but really specifically when we relate that back to chronic health diseases, it's going to help manage blood pressure, it's going to help manage blood sugar, cholesterol, things like that when we get that activity after a heavy meal. Most importantly, I do really like to emphasize, don't beat yourself up. So if you are really working on all of these healthy habits and you go off track a little bit, it's okay, right? We want to make sure that we obviously correct that behavior sooner rather than later, but it's okay. We don't want to add more stress by doing those things. Over on the right side, I have kind of some healthier alternatives, ideas for dessert type options. And then these are 2 recipes. I think, Sarah, you're gonna send out the PowerPoint.
Yes.
These 2 are links to healthy recipe databases. The Diabetes Food Hub, I highly recommend. They have tons of fantastic recipes on that website. And the below one, that's AHC, that's Advocate Healthcare. They actually have a recipe database as well. Between both of these, probably there's thousands of different recipes that you could choose from. What's in your drink? So, I think we've really talked a lot about food, but we have not talked about beverages yet, right? And when we think about beverages, this is really critical that we're thinking about what kinds of things are added to my beverage, perhaps. A lot of times it could be sugar, right? If it's not sugar, maybe it's a sugar substitute, things like that. I have water bolded because there is truly nothing better than water, right? That's, when we think of I think there's some statistic that we're 70% water or something like that. I'd have to ask someone smarter than me, but we are mostly water, right? We want to put water into our bodies. If not water, other 0-calorie beverages, things like green tea, unsweetened black tea would be reasonable. They've got sparkling waters that would be great options. There's a lot of different low or no calorie drinks that we can include. As we get into a lot of these other types of drinks, there's a lot of calories, a lot of sugars oftentimes that are added to them. Alcoholic drinks oftentimes can add more calories than we realize. The alcohol itself has calories, and then if we're mixing it with things that can add more calories, that's again something that can really stand out. I have smoothie drinks on here. I think a lot of times smoothie brands brand themselves as a health food option. I'm here to tell you that a lot of times they are adding things besides just fruits and vegetables to those, and it's always going to be better to eat those fruits and vegetables than drink them. So unless you're making that smoothie yourself, I generally would stay away from things like that. And then things like vitamin water, and there's other brands similar to vitamin water. You really have to be careful. While they do have vitamins in them, the regular vitamin water has, I forget off the top of my head, but I believe it's roughly like 150 calories for a single bottle. And so while it does have vitamins, there's a lot of sugar that they're adding to make that taste better. And on that note, I'll also mention that if we are eating those 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, we should really be meeting those micronutrient needs. If you're following those recommendations of, 2.5 cups of, vegetables, 3 cups for women, 3 cups for men, if you're meeting those types of goals, we really shouldn't need to worry about drinking fruits and things like that or vitamins. Grocery shopping. So kind of my quick recommendation, while it's not perfect, shopping the perimeter of the grocery store can be a healthy way to keep us on track. A lot of times once we go into those center aisles, there's a lot more processed foods. Now, a lot of processed foods are bad, but some processed foods are not bad, right? There's a lot of healthy products that we might still find in the center of the grocery store. Some exceptions would be things like whole grain pasta, brown rice. A lot of our grain-based foods are going to be in the center aisle. When we look for dairy products, again, looking for the light or the low-fat options for them. Reading the nutrition label. We'll look at a sample nutrition label in just a moment. Budgeting, shop the sales. I know right now, and thankfully inflation has gotten a little bit better, it feels like, but grocery store prices still are way more than they used to be, right? And so really trying to help yourself out financially. We don't want eating healthy to be a burden, right? We also know that if we're not eating healthy, we might have more medical costs later in life. So shop the sales, try to prioritize those healthy foods as much as we possibly can. And then check the ingredient list. We'll look at the label, I think is the next slide, but foods are listed by weight in descending order. What that means is that the top ingredient or the first ingredient listed is the ingredient that there's the most of. The very last ingredient there's the least of. And so if we see sugar as the first ingredient, maybe that's a product that we want to think twice about purchasing. If we see whole grain whatever listed as the first ingredient, that's probably a product that we want to consider. Okay, so a couple things that I want to point out, and if you're label readers, hopefully you already might know some of these things. But when we look at a nutrition label, a couple things that we always really want to point out. The reason I have 2 labels here, by the way, is that this is the older version of the nutrition label. The label changed, I think it maybe was roughly 2019. I think we had a revised nutrition label. And so this is now the nutrition label that we use. On this nutrition label, we have added sugars, which does not exist over on this row. And then they've changed a little bit about what things look like at the bottom here. We know that The majority of people in the United States do not need to eat 2,000 calories a day or 2,500 calories a day. And so what they've revised this is just to say that this is based, these percentages here are based on a person that's recommended 2,000 calories, okay? So if anyone knows offhand, there's a very specific calculation to find out how many calories you should be having. In general, I just say, stay away from this. Unless you're meeting individually with a dietitian and you know exactly what your calories should be, we probably just want to stay on the left side of the label here. We would prefer to look at things like the grams and the milligrams. Now, when we think about what's the key information here from a nutrition label, the first thing, is going to be our serving size. Now, I sometimes think this can be confusing. So we have serving size is 2/3 of a cup or 55 grams. Who knows what 55 grams looks like? No. And it's different for everything, right? Depends on how dense that food is, right? 55 grams could be totally different for rice versus pasta versus fruit, right? It totally would be different. Now, in the US, we don't use that system, right? So we have absolutely no idea. We're gonna use what makes sense to us. We're gonna use, okay, I understand, or I could actually measure out 2/3 of a cup. Now, if you have a food scale, you could measure out and weigh out what does 55 grams entail. Most people don't have food scales. That's okay. We're gonna use the measuring cups. So we see 2/3 of a cup as the serving size here. The first thing, of course, that we're gonna look at is the total amount of calories per serving. Now, I think that a lot of people can sometimes get caught up with that serving size and they think, okay, that's what I should be eating, is that 2/3 of a cup. Not necessarily. Really, all this is telling us is that this 2/3 of a cup is for this information that's listed here. So if you eat, let's say we cut this in half, if we're going with 1/3 of a cup, we are quite literally cutting everything that's listed here in half, right? We're gonna have 115 calories, 4 grams of fat, a 1/2 gram of saturated fat, and so on. When we think about everything on the left side of the label here, I generally never recommend reading everything on the label. It's too much, it's overwhelming, it sometimes can make you have more mental fatigue about these healthy eating habits. Now, when we think about what are the key ones that we can point out, specifically our saturated fat is going to be a good one to pick out, again, because this is going to have direct effect on heart health. Limiting saturated fat to less than 2 grams per serving would be an ideal recommendation. If anyone reads cheese labels, when I first became a dietitian, I was very disheartened to know that a standard slice of cheese has 5 grams of saturated fat. So again, use these all within reason, right? It's not to say that we can't ever eat some of these things. We just want to be have moderation or have judicious thinking with how often we're including some of these things. Sodium is a huge one in the United States. A lot of our food products have sodium added to it. Again, I kind of mentioned earlier looking for that low sodium. That word legally is less than 140 milligrams per serving. Depending on what we're having, roughly I would say less than 200 milligrams of sodium per serving as kind of a general blanket. However, let's say you're having something, maybe a frozen entree, okay? I'm not opposed to frozen entrees, by the way. I think they can be useful in a pinch. A lot of frozen entrees, though, are very high in sodium. But not all of them are. Generally speaking, when we think about a whole day of eating, it would be normal for without any other chronic disease, for a healthy adult, we actually need about 2,300 milligrams of sodium a day because your heart uses sodium for pumping. So we cannot get rid of sodium, it's just that we don't want to overdo it. Now, when we think about looking at the sodium for an individual meal, we want to say, okay, maybe roughly around 600, 700 milligrams of sodium for a meal, because if we eat 3 meals a day and maybe 1 or 2 snacks, that's gonna put us roughly in that range of 2,300 milligrams. Dietary fiber is another one that we really want to be paying attention to. Again, fiber makes us feel full and satisfied looking at this to help let us know that this is a higher quality carbohydrate. Fiber is going to be listed on carbohydrate sources generally. And of course, there are added sugars, right? So since this is on our nutrition label now, we now have recommendations for what our added sugars really should be. So for women, we generally recommend less than 20 to 25 grams of added sugars per day. For men, it's 25 to 30 grams of added sugars per day. Keeping in mind that as minimizing it as much as possible, of course, is going to be more beneficial for your health. If we look at the individual labels, generally what I would recommend is less than 5 to 10 grams of added sugar per serving. Once we start pushing past that, now we're really gonna exceed that 20 to 30 grams, you know, based on whether you're male or female.
Question.
Yeah.
What did you take on men? 25 to 30?
25 to 30.
And what about sugar and alcohol?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any specific guideline on total sugar alcohols per day. However, sugar alcohols in excess quantity at any individual time can cause diarrhea. And so generally what we recommend is no more than 10 sugar alcohols per meal or per sitting. I would have to do some research. I've not seen recommendations for total sugar alcohols per day.
I've seen it instead of the added sugars, I've seen sugar alcohols.
Yes, and the sugar alcohols are different in the sense that they do not raise blood sugar.
Okay.
Added sugars directly raise blood sugar, but sugar alcohols do not, which is, that brings up another really good point. So on here, this is legally what food companies are required to list on the nutrition label. Sugar alcohols, it's not here. The reason that manufacturers put something like that on the nutrition label is actually a marketing ploy, because they want to show that their product is not raising, like the carbohydrates that they're using isn't raising blood sugar. So that's actually a marketing tactic for them. Another quick one while we're doing that, saturated fats are listed and trans fats are listed. By the way, if you go home and look at anything in your pantry or fridge, everything should have 0 grams of trans fats. We passed legislation several years back that said trans fats are horrible for us, we have to get them out of our food system. Thankfully, that actually did pass. I anticipate that at some point during my career, hopefully sooner rather than later, trans fats will fall off of our nutrition label, because everything should say 0. We do not have unsaturated fats listed here. Monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, those are those heart healthy fats. Those are the ones that we get from things like olive oil and nuts and seeds and avocado, things like that. Do you see it required to be listed here? No, interesting, right? Yeah.
See, with the trans fat, I noticed that by law, they were required, it has to say 0.
Yeah.
But they still have 0.00.7.
They round down.
Yeah. It still has a little percentage. Every single food has it. Like all the Oreos, it says 0 grams. We keep eating those things for 10 years.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And specifically what you can look for on the ingredient list with that is called partially hydrogenated oils. And that's what manufacturers can use in small enough quantities that it can say 0 on the label. Yeah. The unsaturated fats, though, those heart healthy fats, they're not legally required to be listed on the nutrition label. If you go home and if you have a package of nuts or olive oil, avocado oil, a lot of those manufacturing companies that do have these heart healthy fats, you'll notice that they list out mono and polyunsaturated fats because again, it's in a good way because we like those fats, but that's actually a marketing tactic that they're listing out those heart healthy fats. Great, wonderful questions with the label. Anything else? Yeah.
I've been working on a diet that recommends 25 grams of protein for women 3 times a day.
Okay.
I
Have a hard time with that.
Yeah, breakfast particularly. But a hard-boiled egg is 9 grams of fat for protein.
Protein, yeah.
So who eats 3?
3 eggs in one sitting, yeah. He can help you out. So other things that I would say that you could maybe add to that, a Greek yogurt has 12, depending on the brand, 12 to 15 grams in like one of those individual cups. So that could be something, a great thing to add. Do you do eggs every day? No, okay. You could do like even Quaker sells like a high protein oatmeal that you could look into. That plus maybe a little sprinkle of nuts or things like that can help get you there. Usually just one individual food would be hard at breakfast time. I can share that sentiment because I struggle with protein at breakfast too. Yeah.
Fairlife has a
They
chocolate
do.
drink with 30 grams.
They do. Do you ever, so they make that Core Power protein shake. They also do produce milk as well, and their milk is 5 grams of protein higher as well, if you per 8 ounces.
I just read that protein shake, which I've been using, has a huge number of microplastic material in it. So
Was not aware of that. Yeah.
it was in consumer process.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever I don't know how Premier Protein would fall under that, but that's another good one.
Yeah, the other thing is that you mentioned that yogurt, if you're lactose intolerant, can they make much that's lactose free?
So depends on how severe lactose intolerance is. So that's a really good question that I think a lot of people with lactose intolerance struggle with. When we think about something like milk or ice cream that is very much like not fermented in any way, it is really straight lactose, that is going to exacerbate someone that has lactose intolerance significantly. The more fermented or the more processed the cheese, the less lactose that's in it. So for example, the Fairlife is lactose free. That's a more fermented form of milk, and plus they've applied their technology to remove the lactose, right? Yogurt is a more fermented form of a dairy product. So a lot of times people do tolerate yogurt better than just milk alone because it's more fermented. To take that one step further, the Greek yogurt is more fermented than regular yogurt. And then once we start getting into cottage cheese is kind of the next step as we start having curds. People tend to really tolerate cottage, even if they don't tolerate Greek yogurt, they'll tolerate cottage cheese. And then for most people, a plethora of different hard cheeses really are like, probably won't bother their lactose intolerance as well.
How about kefir?
It's kind of that cross between milk and yogurt. I don't actually know that I can think of any patients that I've had with lactose intolerance that have had kefir. Give it a try. There's tons of probiotics in it.
Yeah, I've used it. But
Yeah. And does it bother you?
Sometimes not.
Yeah. It also could be the other things that you're having with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, good. Any other questions? Okay, how are we doing? We're getting close on time. Okay, we're actually almost done. So our exercise, we've really talked mostly about nutrition tonight, but I can't give a healthy lifestyle presentation without talking about exercise because the two really go hand in hand. I oftentimes think, and I'm a culprit, I'm a dietitian. I love eating healthy, that's totally my jam. I'm not really an exerciser, so I have to really make time for it, right? If we don't make time for it, it is not gonna happen. You have to intentionally set aside time to have that exercise. Lots of different options available. Joining a class, we were just talking about the Center of Elgin around the corner, has tons of different class options available. Scheduling the exercise time for yourself, carving out that time. I've got several successful patients that say, this is my exercise time. Their family and their friends and their coworkers know not to contact them during that time. Great, that is set aside for yourself to be successful with that exercise. Go with a friend, that can help you to be more accountable. Do a video online, YouTube, there's so many different options, and especially, post-COVID, that really exploded. And then our ultimate goal would be 150 minutes of physical activity a week, or if we break that down, roughly 30 minutes on 5 days a week. All right, and then finally, in terms of, forget about diabetes on there. I've used this slide for another presentation. But top strategies for managing health, right? For managing chronic disease, having a healthy lifestyle. So make a plan, right? The more that you plan, the better off you're gonna be. I stole this from Dave Ramsey. A goal without a plan is just a dream, right? Because if we don't have a healthy eating plan or a lifestyle plan for how we're going to be successful, it's gonna be very difficult. All of these strategies that we talked about today, unless we figure out how we're going to include them, what recipes that have citrus and vinegars are we going to include? When are we gonna make that? When am I gonna make that grocery list and get to the grocery store, right? All of these things go into making that plan. Checking blood sugar if that's relevant for you. Oftentimes logging your food intake can be beneficial. It can help to open your eyes to maybe calories that you didn't realize that you're having. Those are 2 apps that I recommend. Creating a support system. There's tons of online support systems for managing different chronic diseases, or if you don't have chronic disease, just managing healthy lifestyles, those exist too. Taking prescribed medications as appropriate. Measuring your foods can be a helpful strategy. Exercising, monitoring your mood, asking yourself, again, why am I eating? How hungry am I? Things like that can all be beneficial strategies. And that is all I do.
I want to thank you for
Oh, thank
coming.
you.
I mean, this was really
Thank you.
Yeah.